Welcome to Inside Games, the only gaming news channel brave enough to report on Switch 2 leaks for the billionth time, billion and first. What number are we on now, Brian?
11 billion. Approximately. These leaks have a little more smoke than usual though, because we got actual real photos. Maybe they're actual, maybe they're real, but you can decide whether there's any fire here or not. Put your hand up close to it and see if it burns.
Remember, you got to use the back though, because you need the palm to do stuff later. We're also especially brave today because you may have noticed we're filming without Sweet Bruce, who is currently driving to TwitchCon, so if you see him, say hi.
But that will not stop the news. We got plenty of it this week. In addition to, those seemingly more legit Switch 2 leaks, Nintendo finally dropped that lawsuit against Palworld we all expected months ago, but it has happened.
Yeah. And hey, speaking of headlines we've come to expect, Square Enix is disappointed with the financial performance of their big releases again.
Yeah, one of these days they'll figure out video games in their fourth decade of doing this. But yes, let's kick off this week's Inside Games Roundup with a company that's had no problems making money. That is Nintendo.
Yeah, they're doing pretty good these days. We're still in the Switch 1 era. It's kind of hitting extra innings now, but finally, we're starting to see some evidence that the Switch 2 is really on the way, which is to say it's actually physically being made. We have some actual images of the Switch 2, or whatever they're going to end up calling it. And surprise, it looks like a Switch.
It's not broke, don't fix it. I think this is smart if these are legit. The images that popped up on Reddit originally came from Chinese social media and showed a pretty standard looking Switch. Some exceptions though, 8-inch screen, so it's a little bit bigger, magnetic Joy-Cons, which that sounds great, and USB-C ports on the top and bottom.
Yeah, the magnetic thing is kind of interesting, especially given that kids are probably going to be swinging this thing around.
Can't speak from experience, yes.
Yeah, you probably know all about it, but let's cover the news first. Video Games Chronicle quoted a source saying that the Reddit images match what Nintendo has told partners to expect from its design. VGC's source hasn't seen the final console, but has been briefed on Nintendo's plans.
Yeah, so adding a little credence to these images, it does make sense that Nintendo would stick close to the original Switch design, considering it is now one of the best-selling consoles of all time.
Yeah, they don't want a Wii U situation, do they? According to this image, there's some upgrades here, and a lot of them are pretty moderate, as you might expect from Nintendo. The Switch 2 will include 12 gigabytes of RAM. The original Switch only had 4, so that's nice. Support for HDMI 2.1 and 256 gigabytes of internal storage. That actually all matches an alleged shipping leak from earlier in the year.
And the design is similar to the current Switch, like we've said, but there are some other changes, revised SLSR buttons and front-facing player LEDs.
Now, obviously, there's been no official confirmation or even commentary on any of this from Nintendo, but they have said that they will announce their next console during this fiscal year, so that would put the announcement landing before March 31st, 2025 at the latest.
And kind of adding to that, last month it was reported that developers were told not to expect the console to launch before April of next year. So we're starting to circle.
Yeah, but I expect if it is next fiscal, it'll probably be early next fiscal, because GTA 6 is supposed to, we'll get there in a minute, but everyone's going to want to avoid GTA 6, even Nintendo, I think. So that's a good window for it. And plus they have the entire fiscal year to land sales and software and all that. What do you think about the leaks, Brian? How much did they click with you?
I think just having covered this kind of stuff for a while, when it's multiple sources that are starting to all say the same things or things are lining up with other leaks, that's always a very promising sign. So, and again, I think it makes sense. They don't need to reinvent the wheel. Nintendo loves to try new stuff, but the Switch works. I think they made the best handheld of all time. So, I think people were just clamoring for a Switch with better insides. So let's just do that. Call it something. Don't call it the Switch U, call it the Switch 2 or whatever. But I think just name it something different and they'll have another hit.
I agree. I think Satoru Iwata's previous business philosophy, he was essentially the one who started Switch. He's a big fan of the Blue Ocean theory that and the Wii and the DS. Like a lot of Nintendo's quirkier titles did get them to new sales markets, and they found a lot of financial success. So for me, the big question was: is Switch 2 going to needlessly be wacky to try to find a new audience, or are they going to iterate? I think the difference between then and now is operating a digital store is so important and they have so many customers already onboarded and buying digital games through the Switch, they can't afford to start an entirely new ecosystem. I don't think anyone can.
No, I think they need to make it all backwards compatible, carry your library over from the other ones. I mean, that's huge. But yeah, I mean, the Switch, I think, was revolutionary because it proved that handheld gaming systems could still work in the age of mobile phones. And before that, people thought that just wasn't going to happen anymore. So they proved the point. I think people like it. The functionality, with kids, it is great. I can speak from firsthand. I still have a launch Switch that it doesn't work great, but it still works in handheld. So I fix the Joy-Cons, make those better, and I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, there are Switches out there. I've got one too. I've had to do a lot of mechanic work on it, but I remember some beat to hell NES units in the US back in the 80s and 90s. So it's interesting to have Nintendo trucking strong in a lot of the same ways.
Yeah, I think Nintendo, they've made some tanks in the past in terms of hardware. Yeah, the NES, all that. So I don't know. I think it's just good for the industry too when Nintendo's strong because there's no other company like it. So, they survived a scare with the Wii U, but I think, I think it's promising. I don't think they're in a great position. They just don't really have to do that much with this next console.
Yeah, which may put them at odds with themselves, I think, sometimes. But we'll see. Who knows what ridiculous, weird gadgets the new Joy-Cons are going to have. Heartbeat monitor, maybe they'll finally get that in there. And yeah, like you said, they're much needed competition for Sony, who's kind of running away with stuff. They could use some stiff competition. Speaking of strong arming and stiffing, Nintendo's legal department is maintaining their historical precedent. And they're finally putting the weight on a competitor. There's a story. Nintendo, along with the Pokemon Company, have sued the monster catching game Pal World, saying that Pocket Pair violated their patents.
Yeah, the lawsuit was filed in Tokyo, and they're asking for an injunction and compensation for damages, quote, on the grounds that Pal World infringes multiple patent rights.
Pal World came out in January in early access and Xbox game preview, and it was a hit, an absolute hit. It racked up 25 million players in its first month.
Yeah, and with that popularity came a lot of attention. A lot of people noticed some similarities between Pal World's character designs and ones from Pokemon games.
Yeah, it's pretty strong. Pretty strong. Ironically, Pokemon has also been accused of ripping off its designs from other franchises like Dragon Quest, and its overworld in the early games definitely shared resemblances to other RPGs like Earthbound.
Yeah, so Pokemon's not completely blame-free here, but
I think some of the same people worked on Earthbound and Pokemon, actually, which might explain some of that.
Yeah, true. And I mean, Toriyama's art was, so influential. But yeah, in response, Tokyo-based Pocket Pair, the developer of Pal World, said it's, quote, truly unfortunate that we will be forced to allocate significant time to matters unrelated to game development. Obviously, they're talking about the lawsuit.
They added, we will do our utmost for our fans and to ensure that indie game developers are not hindered or discouraged from pursuing their creative ideas. Certainly putting themselves up as the defender of the underdog, huh?
They're going to deal with a lot of attorneys. Nintendo is not going to play with this.
Yeah, and if you're seeking damages for something like Pokemon, you can claim a lot of damages just because the business is so huge. So that's kind of scary. I'm kind of fascinated by the reaction to this, though. It seems like a lot of people, even though a lawsuit seemed inevitable, a lot of people are mad at Nintendo for being the bad guy in this situation. I'm kind of surprised at that. I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
This was inevitable. Yeah, Pokemon is a multi-billion-dollar franchise. Nintendo has always gone out. Nintendo goes after ROM sites, any kind of mod. They just don't play. So they are going to use all of their legal might and all of their resources, especially to defend Pokemon. So this is wondering why the sun comes up in the morning.
I don't quite buy the statement about them defending indie developers, their abilities to pursue their creative dreams. The developers of Pal World could have done that using monster designs that were not that similar to Pokemon. There's nothing preventing them from that. So I don't know, in all these situations, there's a world where they could have just made their own monster. I know that after hundreds of Pokemon games, it might be hard to find an appealing design that doesn't at least resemble something in Pokemon already. But some of that stuff was uncomfortably close, so that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And if you're going to sell a product, you have to make sure that it's intellectually unique. That's just part of it. So
yeah, and there are other monster catching games out there. Like it's not, you know, like Temtem, I don't think got sued, and like, you know, there's a lot of other people with or games with that mechanic. Pokemon didn't invent it. I mean, they're the most famous, but you know, there's all. So yeah, you just. But if you get too close in anything, yeah, this is gonna happen.
Yeah, it happens a lot with fan games. The second that a fan game starts to come together, then they get sued for being a Star Wars game. And maybe don't make a Star Wars game if you don't. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Like you're clearly putting yourself next to something that's very popular and enjoying that reflected popularity. But yeah, it's a very dangerous line to walk. Man, speaking of being dangerously unique, sorry. I don't know if you had something else to say, but
it made me think of when I was a reporter in Waco. There was a tombstone like maker, like just a local businesses that made tombstones, and their name was Metallica, and they got sued by Metallica. Like just a local thing, apropos of nothing.
Man, I thought you were going with the frozen pizza thing. Interesting. Yeah, don't poke Metallica. Don't come after Pokemon. Well, speaking of things that didn't end up all that great, Concord's game director has left the company, and everyone else, it's not looking too good at this moment.
Yeah, Kotaku reports that Ryan Ellis told staff at Firewalk Studios that he would be stepping down from his game director role and moving into a support position. So yeah, not a good sign.
What kind of support? Jeez. Patting people on the back as they walk out. Concord's launch is a mess. You've probably heard of it. Mediocre reviews, low player counts, and Sony did the unprecedented and unreleased it, pulled it from stores and refunded all copies.
Yeah, and this was a big budget. Like Sony had a lot riding on this, so it's a big flop. Sources told Kotaku that Ellis was too emotional to speak during a studio-wide meeting after the game's launch.
Now, some in the studio have told Kotaku that they're reasonably pessimistic Concord will ever return. Though there has been speculation that it could have a second life as a free-to-play game or a PlayStation Plus exclusive. That would be a weird choice. I don't know about the PS exclusive thing.
Right.
You need players.
There's also obvious speculation that layoffs might be forthcoming for Firewalk, which is currently about 150, 170 employees, and that might be justified. Earlier this year, Sony laid off an estimated 900 people across the company. They canceled multiple games, just part of the industry-wide trend we're seeing right now of job slashing. So it is definitely a bummer, definitely a fact of life in the gaming industry.
Yeah, what a ride though, because Firewalk got acquired before they shipped a game. The one game they shipped was so dud that it had to get pulled from the market, and if they get shut down after that, that is hundreds of millions of dollars getting thrown into a furnace. And I don't know how. Well, I guess the previous head of the previous head of PlayStation already left, so that might tell us a thing or two about who's going to be held accountable for that. But yeah, it's not a good situation. It's just not.
Yeah, this is the kind of flop, like if it was Hollywood, this is the kind of flop that could like kill a whole studio. So it's real bad. Real bad.
Yeah, has any movie, I'm sure this has happened in cinematic history, and now it's piqued my interest, but I wanna find a movie that releases so poorly that they pull it from theaters immediately. I don't know, Brian, does that jog any bells for you?
Oh gosh, there have been some big bombs. Cutthroat Island in the 90s.
Waterworld?
Yeah, that John, it was the Disney one. It was like John something.
Oh, John Carter?
John Carter, yes, huge flaw. A lot of times what studios will do in Hollywood is just bury it. Like if they think they'll release it sort of in an off, time, or there's times of the years you can kind of just bury it and kind of be done with it. Or that they do what Warner Brothers does and just never release it and just claim it as a tax write-off.
Yeah, mark it down as a business loss. It's funny that comparison I think is apt, because I think we're entering the era of games where studios are so big and so nuanced that they start to release games fully as products. Like in the summer, we need a shooter. In the fall, we need an RPG. And you just farm it out to your studios or whatever, and the creative process gets really messy, and then you get games that completely miss the mark or just don't understand what people want at a given time. Fascinating to see. And speaking of not being able to judge audiences, Square Enix is yet again upset that their newest Final Fantasy game didn't quite meet their expectations.
Yeah, this came from a financial results briefing that was held in May, but the briefing notes were made public this week. And Square Enix president Takashi Kiryu said that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy 16, quote, did not meet expectations, which is basically a meme at this point when it comes to Square Enix.
Yeah, going back for about 10 years now, I think, almost. In his remarks, Kiryu said, "In the HD Games sub-segment, we released multiple new titles, including major titles such as Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, but profits unfortunately did not meet our expectations."
He added that initial sales of the 4v4 party shooter Foam Stars and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, quote, were not as strong as expected.
Again, these comments were made in May. Shortly after that, Square Enix reportedly laid off employees in the US and Europe.
Yeah, they also announced in May that they were, quote, aggressively pursuing a multi-platform strategy. You might remember Final Fantasy 16 was a timed exclusive for the PS5. It's now on PC, but yeah, multi-platform, probably a good idea if you want to get your sales up.
100%. And I'm very glad about that, because Square has kind of they've been cozy with PlayStation for a while. I mean, there's a history there, but also, let's be real, that kind of thing doesn't happen without money. We can presume that PlayStation was cutting checks for that. The good news is that the check is no longer worth it. Yay! So hopefully the rest of us don't have to wait on other platforms just to get a game partially funded.
Yeah, that was a bummer. I feel like they're not, I don't know. I don't feel like they're doing all they can for some of these games. Like Final Fantasy, like maybe it's not what it used to be, but I just feel like it's not, maybe it's not marketing or I don't know, or maybe the budgets are just too big, but it just feels like they're not doing everything they could be with this franchise. I love Final Fantasy. I love Dragon Quest, obviously. It just feels like Square Enix has a lot of just iconic IP, but I just don't know if they know what to do with it.
Yeah, or they're not comfortable with just shipping a game every 3 years and getting a modest return on that. And I think big companies, they really want to chase that 40 million seller, and they think the next game's always going to be that one. 7 Rebirth kind of had all the ingredients. The only downside is that it's part of a franchise and part of a continuity that kind of drives people away, but those open world content-packed games used to sell like hotcakes, and it had the 7 brand on it and everything.
It's just kind of, I don't know, and maybe that kind of game is getting a little old-fashioned, the big open world RPG. Plus, like, the numbering, like, I don't know if a new fan is going to come into something that is the 16th in the franchise, even though you don't need to play the other ones, but that's intimidating to somebody new, and, you know, like I love them. I've played most of them, but yeah, just like a young kid, I just don't know if it's the same thing. And meanwhile, you have like FromSoft, and they kind of, you know, they keep budgets low. They sort of put out like a, you know, I feel like they keep costs within line, and then they just make hits. So I know that's easier said than done, but it does feel like it's gotten a little bloated on Square Enix's part.
Yeah, luckily, production superstar Naoki Yoshida is over there teaching them how to ship games again. So hopefully that'll get in line over the next couple of years. But hey, speaking of games that are theoretically guaranteed to sell tens if not hundreds of millions, we're finally boxing in the release date for Grand Theft Auto 6 a little bit. Maybe. That is until it gets delayed.
Right. Yeah, don't write this one in ink. Publisher Take-Two Interactive's recently published annual report says that, quote, Rockstar Games plans to release Grand Theft Auto 6 in the fall of calendar 2025.
I think a lot of people are going to get mysteriously ill in fall of 2025. They added that Rockstar will share more details over time.
Yeah, and this took off. I mean, anything with GTA 6 is news, but it also debunked some recent rumors that the game had been delayed. So at least not yet. I don't know.
Yeah, to my knowledge, a lot of those rumors were somebody said it might happen, which is true of any game until it launches. So, you know, things kind of metastasize on the internet.
It had a gaming news with a Z feel to it. Yeah.
Yeah. My uncle at Nintendo kind of energy. But the thing is, it's fairly believable too, you know? But we'll all be there whenever Grand Theft Auto 6 decides to come out. On that note, Take-Two emphasized the importance of the franchise to their entire business, saying, "We are dependent on the future success of Grand Theft Auto."
All right, let's do a 5-second review. Final Fantasy 16, PC. I played it. I really like it. I like the combat. When I started, I forgot that it was an MA-rated game. So, like, within the first 5 minutes, 2 people are just having sex in a hallway, and I was like, "Oh, this is spicy. Spicy Final Fantasy." So yeah, like even in my 40s, I'm like, this feels too old for me.
Yeah, there's blood. Someone says, fuck. Feels very grown up.
I just picture a black mage blushing under his giant hat.
My stars. Why the goddess? Well, provided your heart rate has come down, let's look at the video games coming out next week. First up, we have Aura, History Untold. Build a nation and lead your people throughout history to the pinnacles of human achievement as you explore new lands, develop arts and culture, conduct diplomacy, and go head-to-head with your rivals to prove you are the greatest ruler ever known. Imperial on one side and Metric on the other. Doesn't get better than that. It's your world now! Aura History Untold is coming to PC on September 24th.
Next up, Disney Epic Mickey Rebrushed. Embark on a magical journey in Disney Epic Mickey Rebrushed. Shape your adventure with a stroke of a brush and transform Wasteland as Mickey Mouse in this beautifully recreated 3D platformer. It comes to pretty much everything. PS4, PS5, Switch, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, September 24th.
Next up, we got Greedfall 2, The Dying World. Dive back into the unique world of Greedfall again in an even deeper RPG experience. Uprooted from the island of your birth, find your freedom, explore the old continent, and forge your destiny through alliances, scheming, and battles. Greedfall 2 comes to PC on September 24th.
Ooh, next up, a big one, Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom. The people of Hyrule are being stolen away by strange rifts that have appeared throughout the kingdom. With a certain swordsman among the missing, it's up to Princess Zelda to save her kingdom in a brand new adventure in the Legend of Zelda series. It comes to, where else? The Switch, September 26th.
And just to round things out here, I wanted to introduce a little thing where we just shout out a particular game that we're excited about, just to maybe introduce people to what's going on. We talked about this in the releases last week. I played it a little bit. It's phenomenal. UFO 50. It is a compilation of 50 retro-style games, but I guess the gimmick, if there is one, is that they basically apply modern design to older games.
I'm glad you played it and it looks so cool. And Derek Yu, I think, is awesome. So that, I'm totally psyched to play it now.
Yeah. Same talent behind it that did Spelunky and Spelunky 2, games that absorbed a lot of my life. These aren't quite as intimidating, but any one of these games could really just take an entire evening for you. So if you have any kind of retro leanings at all, check it out. Incredible value, and all these games are just really delightful. They even have like a little fake narrative behind the developers behind all the games inside the context of this compilation. So there's some fun nods to 80s and early 90s game development culture in there too. So it's a phenomenal package steeped in video game history, and I couldn't recommend it more enthusiastically. And speaking of enthusiastic recommendations, I have a few more selects, a few more noble gamers in the audience that decided to support the show directly through our Patreon. So thank you very much, DJ Kento and Shaky Pants. I'd invite everyone to check out our Patreon. You know, we don't necessarily promise a ton of bonus content or anything like that because the internet's full of it. You're probably not waiting for another bonus podcast to listen to, but you can get access to ad-free episodes, our undying support, and random memes that I post. So check it out. But either way, we appreciate your time, your eyeballs, and your dedication to Sweet Lady video games. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, audience, and we'll see you next week on Inside Games.